What is going on, Diablo fans? Dobrunsky here. In today's video, I want to largely focus on a lot of the negative criticisms that I've seen pointed towards Diablo 4. Now, don't get me wrong, I did largely enjoy my beta experience over the weekend, but I've sort of had some time to kind of stew on a lot of the negative criticisms that I've seen pointed towards this game, and I wanted to do a little bit of a deep dive. So I'm going to cover everything from itemization to repetitive endgame content, boss fights, field of view, and user interface complaints. I kind of wanted to talk about everything because I genuinely believe that some of these criticisms are valid and others I just think are the lowest of the lowest hanging possible fruit. So I thought it'd be an interesting video idea. Again, let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree, disagree, or if you want to add anything that you think I potentially missed. But with that being said, let's jump in. So I first want to talk about the Diablo 4 user interface because I think I've seen several valid suggestions to improve it to help the overall user experience, but I've seen just as many poor suggestions to change things that I don't think will really benefit the player or really improve the experience in Diablo 4. So in regards to valid criticism, the first major one is that if you bind force move to mouse button 1, it doesn't also work to simultaneously pick up loot in the ground or talk to NPCs. It's kind of hard to explain, but if you played Path of Exile, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can bind force movement to mouse button 1, and then you can also interact with the environment. This would be a small change, but would go miles towards improving the overall user experience in Diablo 4. And I think that it wouldn't be too big of a deal to implement it, so I would hopefully like to see this implemented moving forward with the release of the game. The second valid critique that I've seen is having additional options with the map. So whether or not you can adjust transparency or toggle it back and forth between a mini map in the corner, potentially move the position of it from upper right hand corner to upper left hand corner, but also be a large transparent overlay as well. So again, if you played Last Epoch or PoE, this is a simple toggle. You can go back and forth. Not, I think, necessarily a major groundbreaking change, but for those that like having a large map overlay, having that as an option to toggle would be nice. Now moving on to complaints centered around the appearance of the inventory in Diablo 4. I really think that this is a waste of time. Diablo 4 is by no means like setting a new bar for the inventory screen for ARPGs, but I really think it's fine the way that it is, and I think making any adjustments to sort of revamp it would be a waste of time. I'll do some post-editing and just show some other inventory screens from popular ARPGs, but I just don't think that the current state is really that bad, and in terms of trying to focus on fixing things, this really is kind of low-hanging fruit, at least it is in my opinion. Complaints about the font is another theme that I've seen brought up in several different occasions, and I just don't get it. I'm gonna compare two examples here of some Diablo 4 loot font and then some Diablo 2 Resurrected loot font. I don't really see a massive stark difference. Sure, it actually is different, but I really feel like you actually have to narrow in and zoom in and try and focus on the differences. I just don't get this complaint either. I would imagine in the grand scheme of things, changing the loot font or all the font in Diablo 4 wouldn't be that big a deal, but I really just don't see why people are personally complaining about this, although I have seen links or suggestions to point it towards mobile game fonts, and maybe I'm just out of the norm here. I don't typically play a ton of mobile games, so maybe that's just why it's not flashing a mobile loot game font thing. It's not triggering certain dopamine things in my brain. I don't know, I just don't get it, but I think the font is fine. The field of view or perspective of gameplay in Diablo 4 is another common criticism that I've seen over and over and over again. Myself personally, I think it's fine, but if you do compare it to other ARPGs, you can definitely tell the perspective is a little bit more zoomed in. So maybe an option to toggle back and forth with a more traditional overview of gameplay would be a nice way to kind of please people that seem to have an issue with it being too zoomed in. Again, I didn't really have an issue with it, but I would imagine based on the fact that when you trigger a world boss event, having that automatic zoom out, that it might not be too difficult to add a toggle option. But again, in terms of hierarchies of feedback and criticism, I do think it's kind of low-hanging fruit in that regard. So moving on to itemization, this is a very difficult topic to talk about in its entirety because we don't really know the true extent of the endgame content and then drop rates in the endgame content, and then what the power scaling is going to be like when we get to nightmare dungeons and do the different world tiers. And we're just really kind of working off of a small perspective of playing a tiny portion of the game and just redoing some dungeons over and over again at level 25 and sort of making assumptions or just educated guesses on what itemization is going to be like. But the only kind of valid criticism, I think, is potentially drop rates currently. I definitely don't want to see drop rates more in line with Diablo 2, and I know that sounds funny because I'm largely a Diablo 2 content creator, but as I get older and I have less time to play video games, I want more of a return of investment for the amount that I play a video game. So I don't want to farm for 10 hours in Diablo 2 and then maybe get one good drop, but I also don't want to farm 10 hours in Diablo 4 and then be flooded with an insane amount of legendary and rare items and then not know what to do. It would be nice to find sort of like a balance between the two. Maybe like one nice drop every hour and then like a really, really nice drop every like 2 or 3 hours, sort of pace like that. So not quite gearing up like Diablo 3, but again, not as extreme drop rates as Diablo 2. And I know that some people during the beta experienced like just mass volumes of legendary items dropping. So I wonder if that's what it's going to be like in the end game, or maybe they upped drop rates because it was the beta and they wanted to get feedback, or are we getting some sort of skewed view on itemization because we're just in this weird loop of level 25 characters farming only a portion of the endgame content and we're just making educated guesses. I don't really know, but in terms of like criticism, I definitely don't want drop rates to be insane, but I also don't want them to be the opposite in the spectrum where you're farming for hundreds of hours for only like a couple decent drops. It'd be nice to find sort of like a in between Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, if that makes sense. So I want to shift gears now and talk about the potential for the endgame content of Diablo 4 to be repetitive, and criticisms pointed towards the repetitive nature of some of the dungeons. Now, I definitely think that this criticism is valid, but I do worry that people are maybe kind of looking too much into sort of the snapshot of the little bit of content that we've been able to experience in the Diablo 4 beta. We're playing up to character level 25. We haven't had a chance to experience the different world tiers, Nightmare Dungeons, the Helltide event, Tree of Whispers. There is additional endgame content past what we've had access to in the current beta. But with that being said, I definitely think the criticism is valid for concerns that that content might get repetitive over time, like Season 2 and Season 3. Just doing the same stuff might get boring. But they have committed to doing substantial content updates on a continuous basis. So as long as they stick to that and adding maybe a new world boss event, adding rune words or a different new boss mechanic or item mechanic or different endgame content mechanics, that is what's going to keep players coming back and wanting to experience every new season. If you take Path of Exile as a direct comparison, Path of Exile today is nowhere near what it was like 8 years ago, right? It was continually built upon and they added new league mechanics and then new bosses and just was continually built upon a solid foundation. So I worry that people are kind of just taking the current snapshot of what we've had available to play in the beta and then just making sort of assumptions in the long term. And I do agree that if they don't add any additional endgame content, it will start to probably get boring after several seasons, but if they start with the current foundation that they have and they continue to add new mechanics, I think that Diablo 4 will have promising future in terms of replayability, at least season to season to season. But as far as the repetitive nature to complete tasks within a dungeon, I can largely sympathize and agree with his critique. There was several scenarios over the weekend when I was backtracking through a dungeon to kill a single monster, to collect a single piece of resource, to open a door to take on the final boss to complete the dungeon. This was very repetitive for me personally, and I feel like you could alleviate a lot of these issues by simply just adjusting the requirement to complete certain quest tasks. So make it so you only have to kill 90% of monsters or collect 90% of a resource instead of that final 100%, because backtracking to find a single monster just was repetitive in nature for me, and I feel like this would alleviate a lot of the issues. The Diablo 4 boss battles is the final theme that I want to talk about in today's video. A lot of people have suggested that they're not quite as dynamic as Path of Exile or Last Epoch, and I do largely agree with this criticism. I do want to point out though that they've been largely improved from earlier versions of content creator betas where I've got to experience those boss fights, but I think that a simple tweak would be to slightly increase their damage values, but at the same time reducing their life values, because it did feel like some scenarios the duration of the boss battle kind of dragged on. It's cool to have different mechanics to dodge and avoid certain attacks, but when the boss battle starts to be like 3, 4, 5 minutes, it kind of, at least for me, it sort of dragged on a little bit. Again, this isn't like a huge criticism for me, but I definitely think that maybe slightly tweaking the damage values, but also at the same time reducing the life values would make the fights a little bit more dynamic and shorter in duration, which I think would up the intensity a little bit. Although that's kind of like a personal taste thing. Some people may agree or disagree. But in terms of the world boss events, I thought they were completely fine. It was fun. Ashava one-shotted a lot of Twitch streamers, so it definitely was a difficult battle until you kind of like understood the mechanics. So I thought those were interesting aspect of Diablo 4. I know some people aren't super keen on them because it sort of leans into the MMO aspect, but for me personally, I thought the world boss events were fantastic. But anyways, guys, that wraps up today's video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comment section below if you guys agree, disagree, or if you would add anything that you think I possibly missed in today's video. Any feedback is welcome. Other than that, guys, hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys on my next YouTube video or live stream. Peace out.
Addicted to the rush, I never meant to